Jai Sri Radhe. So, I've decided to do the Vrindavana Mahimamrita. I've been writing and commenting on Vrindavana Mahimamrita for some time now. I haven't gone through the whole book. The Vrindavana Mahimamrita contains 1,700 verses approximately. It was written by Prabodhananda Saraswati. And I've been interested in Prabodhananda Saraswati for some time. The Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya generally considers itself, even people who are initiated in Nityananda, Advaita, and other families, the defining feature of the Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya is its adherence to a tradition started by a philosophical and intellectual and devotional tradition and aesthetic tradition begun by Rupa Goswami. So generally speaking, we consider ourselves to be Rupanugas, followers of Sri Rupa Goswami. And Raghunath Dasa is perhaps the best of the Rupanugas. Certainly he is the one who shows the most devotion to Rupa Goswami directly. And his works tend to elaborate on Rupa Goswami and to make more clear the role of Radha Dasya. So Radha Dasya is very much something that comes into its own in the Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya from the time of Raghunath Das Goswami. So we're not Prabodhananda Anugas. And Prabodhananda is not, strictly speaking, a Rupanuga. And this is probably why we don't get that much about Prabodhananda in Gaudiya Vaishnava literature, not even the Chaitanya Chandramrita. The Chaitanya Chandramrita slipped out of usage, even though in the first early writings of the Vaishnava Vandanas and texts of that sort, Prabodhananda is very much presented as being the glorifier of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and the Chaitanya Chandramrita is probably, well, we don't have any reliable manuscripts of Sarvabhauma's Chaitanya Shataka, but even if we consider Chaitanya Shataka to be the first, and those two verses that are quoted in Chaitanya Charita Mahakavya and other texts, that those two verses attributed to Sarvabhauma do not even appear in the extant Chaitanya Shataka that's attributed to Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. And Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, well, we have examples of his writing in the Padyavali, and so it's easy to recognize whether something is his or not. Fairly easy anyway. It's somewhat, he was obviously a great scholar and a master of Sanskrit verse as well. At any rate, Prabodhananda Saraswati's Chaitanya Chandramrita, according to the earliest Bengali writings in the genre of Vaishnava Vandana, that Prabodhananda is remembered for that work, but that work is not even quoted in Chaitanya Charitamrita. You would think that at least one verse would get in there. Oftentimes, actually, in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, you do find chaya, you find a kind of reflection of the verses in Chaitanya Chandramrita, and particularly in the 7th chapter of Adi Lila, which is very, very persuasive that Prakashananda and Prabodhananda would be the same individual. But those are things that we cannot settle here. One thing we do know is that of the Vrindavana Mahimamrita, the 17th chapter is the one that had some currency in Gaudiya Vaishnava circles. But even then, it was, and it has been translated a couple of times into Bengali verses, so it's not entirely unknown. But the dominance of Rupa Goswami, the dominance of the 6 Goswamis, the dominance of Bhagavata and its commentaries have meant that historically Prabodhananda Saraswati was almost entirely excluded from discussion or relish in the Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya. It's only been fairly recently, I think since the 19th century, when Prabodhananda's books were rediscovered, and in particular the Rasa Sudhanidhi and the Vrindavana Mahimamrita. But of course there are other books also that were never in currency, like Sangita Madhava, that were rediscovered by Haridas Das. And another one is the Ascharya Rasa Prabandha. Another one is the Shruti Stuti Vyakya. And there are a number of other things that Prabodhananda Saraswati wrote, which just, there are only 1, 2, 3, very few manuscripts available, which shows that Prabodhananda Saraswati probably didn't take any disciples, and he didn't have a school following him, a school venerating him as being the new Rasika Acharya. Well, he wasn't exactly new, because at the very least, he's a contemporary of Rupa Goswami in the same age. But the life of Prabodhananda Saraswati is kind of interesting, and when one collects all the data from the Gaudiya Sampradaya about Prakashananda and also about Prabodhananda, and then we look at the legends of Prabodhananda in the Radha Vallabha Sampradaya, where of course the Radha Rasa Sudhanidhi is, as a matter of faith, is considered to be the writing of Hita Harivansha. So my conclusion about Prabodhananda Saraswati is that he starts out as a sannyasi. Most likely the story of Prakashananda Saraswati applies to him. And then he comes into contact with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He writes the Chaitanya Chandramrita. After Mahaprabhu's disappearance, he comes to Vrindavan. And when he comes to Vrindavan, then he is just bowled away by the Vrindavan mood. It's not unlikely that some of the verses in Chaitanya Chandramrita were also composed in Vrindavan. But probably after writing Chaitanya Chandramrita, the next work that he wrote of significance is the 17th chapter, or the 17th century, the 17th chapter of the Vrindavana Mahimamrita. So that it actually contains more than 100 verses, and it's generally known in the Gaudiya Vaishnava world as the Vrindavana Shataka. So the Vrindavana Shataka is now included as the 17th Shataka of the Vrindavana Mahimamrita. And that was translated into Braja Bhasha by Bhagavanta Mudita, who had very close ties with the Radha Vallabha Sampradaya, even though he was a Gaudiya himself. And as Bhagavanta Mudita translated the verses, the Vrindavana Shataka, that is the 17th Shataka of Vrindavana Mahimamrita. And in all likelihood, the next thing that Prabodhananda Saraswati wrote was the Radha Rasa Sudhanidhi. And this Radha Rasa Sudhanidhi more or less indicates that Prabodhananda Saraswati went over to the Radha Vallabha Sampradaya in terms of his mood, and in terms of the way that he approached the Vrindavan mood, very much as in terms of Radha Dasya. So even before Raghunath Das Goswami sprung into prominence, these things are all going on at the same time. Who came first, who came last? This is pointless. It may be it may be quite true that Prabodhananda Saraswati was inspired by Rupa Goswami, and why not? There are songs by Hariram Vyas in which Prabodhananda and the 6 Goswamis, Rupa and Sanatan, are mentioned together. So that's not so far-fetched to think that Prabodhananda Saraswati was in fairly close relationship with Rupa and Sanatana. As a matter of fact, Prabodhananda Saraswati's samadhi is near Kaliyaghat, and or is at Kaliyaghat, which is just a stone's throw from Madan Mohan. So, and it seems quite clear that Prabodhananda resided there in a very simple fashion to the end of his days. So he was in Vrindavana, and not very far from Madan Mohan, and not very far either from the Radha Vallabha temple. So I personally consider myself something of a Prabodhanandanuga. And this is principally because Prabodhananda Saraswati, more than anybody else, glorified Vrindavan Dham. So I consider him to be the Acharya of Vrindavan Vas. That's not to minimize anybody else, of course. But his glorification of Vrindavan, his instructions about how one should reside in Vrindavan, how one should meditate in Vrindavan, how one cultivates a spiritual life in Vrindavan. These are things that make him the Acharya of Vrindavan Bhav, of Vrindavan Vas. So I call this Vrindavana Vasa Sadhana. He is the Acharya of Vrindavana Vasa Sadhana. So these things are going to come up, and I'm not going to try to get ahead of myself. I'd like to read each verse and read the commentary, and then if anything comes to mind. And of course, there are always going to be cross-references, so these are being taken from my blog, and you will likely find links and in the article itself, and you can follow up in those links. And I hope that those links will be updated as I go through it, because as I go through it, the cross-references, the internal cross-references for Vrindavana Mahimamrita will only increase as we get a clearer picture of the Prabodhananda philosophy to become a Prabodhanandanuga. You have to understand his thought completely, and then you have to compare and contrast. So I think, in my opinion, the similarities of Gaudiya Vaishnavism in its ultimate form and Radha Vallabha Sampradaya are most close to one another. But there are some differences that should not be discounted. So, my dear friends, let me share with you this Amrita of the glories of Vrindavan Dham, the nectar, the ambrosia, the immortality bestowing ambrosia of the glories of Vrindavan Dham. śrī-rādhā-muralī-manohara-padāmbhojaṁ sadā bhāvayan Sri Chaitanya-Mahaprabhoḥ pada-rajaḥsv ātmānam evārpayan śrīmad-bhāgavatottamān guṇa-nidhīn atyādarād ānaman śrī-vṛndāvana-divya-vaibhavam ahaṁ stotuṁ mudā prārabhe. So the essence of the verse, stotuṁ mudā prārabhe. I begin to glorify joyfully. I begin to glorify joyfully. Mudā, stotuṁ prārabhe. So I want you to know, and just as I as I'm going through this, as I start this video series, or this podcast series, you should remember that meanwhile I'm working on a whole different part of the Vrindavana Mahimamrita. So the part what I was doing, I've just been doing 131, and I posted it on Facebook, and immediately I got some objections. So one of the big objections in Prabodhananda Saraswati's writing is that there are verses that are misogynist in nature. I'm not going to get into that too much now because I will discuss it later on. But my point here is that mudā means joyfully. So the bhajan is joyful. This is a basic principle that we have in Vaishnavism. When Srila Prabhupada first came to the West, and then the motto that gave birth, let's say, to the Gaudiya Vaishnava movement in America, to ISKCON, was chant, dance, and be happy. Chant, dance, and be happy. So this is mudā. So of course the chanting, chanting, shravanam kirtanam. So doing kirtanam, glorifying Krishna, glorifying Radha, glorifying his dham, glorifying his servants, these four things are the essence of Vrindavana bhajan. Worshipping Radha, the ashraya, worshipping Krishna, the vishaya, worshipping the servants of Krishna, in Mathura Rasa, the gopis, the sakhis, the manjaris, and worshipping the dham, Vrindavan dham. Without Vrindavan dham, the rest doesn't happen. Vrindavan dham is the fundament. It's the base. It's the sat, the Sandini Shakti. But as a Sandini Shakti, you have to remember it's the Sandini Shakti of Madhura Rasa. It's the Sandini Shakti of the Madhura Rasa Krishna. And of course, Vrindavan goes even beyond that. But Prabodhananda Saraswati is Ekanta Madhura Rasa Bhakta. He is so Ekanta Madhura Rasa Bhakta that you find very little about the other rasas. It is nearly exclusively a description of Vrindavan as the abode, as the playground of the divine couple, of the playground of the love-besotted divine couple. That's Vrindavan. So Vrindavan is the object of our meditation, and it's actually the doorway to our meditation of Radha and Krishna. And there are so many things that could be said about that, but the point here is that it's mudā, that it's happiness, that it's joyful. Service to Krishna is joyful. That's why it may be said that we take a different approach to evil, because we see the joyful aspect of God's creation. We see that the creation was made in God's image, just as in the Bible, it is as a garden, as a place for him to enjoy his pastimes. And most of the time we are trying to improve on that garden, sometimes with not such great success. Anyway, we can talk about those things another time. But so the essence of this verse, for all those who are interested in Sanskrit, stotuṁ, to worship, mudā, joyfully, prārabhe, I begin. So what is he going to praise? Ahaṁ stotuṁ mudā prārabhe, I begin. So Vrindavana-divya-vaibhavam. So the accusative case, that I begin to worship the glories, the Vaibhava, the divine glories of Sri Vrindavan Dham. And now he prepares and says how he prepares himself to joyfully worship Vrindavan's glories. And he does that. He places three things in front. So these three things also apply to the four categories of tattva that I just outlined, right? So he starts by saying śrī-rādhā-muralī-manohara-padāmbhojaṁ sadā bhāvayan. So bhāvayan is present participle and refers to ahaṁ. So I, doing this, so three things, he's going to list three things that he does before he starts or while he does. He's doing it simultaneously. Present participle means simultaneous action. So he says, I'm beginning. So how is he beginning? He's beginning while he does these three things simultaneously. You can walk and chew gum. This is the achintya bheda bheda tattva. Oftentimes, intellectually, we get into problems. Usually those problems consist of before and after, cause and effect, and value, or more valuable or less valuable, things like that. So it's very difficult for us to think of simultaneity. For example, achintya bheda bheda, achintya means the absolute simultaneity of oneness and difference. And that simultaneously of oneness and difference is not based on a distinction between genus and type, or genus and individual. It's not. It's simultaneity, absolute simultaneity. It's like having a right eye and a left eye, and you have to see with both eyes in order to get three dimensions. So that is the way that one has to understand the achintya bheda bheda also. So these three states, let's say. So what's the first thing? The first thing says, thinking constantly of the lotus feet of Radha and Krishna who plays his enchanting flute. Now, the next line is Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhoḥ pada-rajaḥsv ātmānam evārpayan. I offering my soul into the dust of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's lotus feet. Is there a before and after? Two Leelas, Chaitanya's Leela and Radha and Krishna's Leela, achintya bheda bheda, simultaneously going on. Sometimes Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Leela is presented as being external to the internal Radha and Krishna Leela. So that you think of, for instance, this is significant also, you could say that because historically speaking, in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, and this actually happened, is one of the things that was settled at Kaitari. So I'm not going to go into Kaitari here. There's stuff on my blog. If you're interested, you can search for Kaitari on my blog. But the idea with establishing that before chanting Radha and Krishna's Leela, that one should chant Mahaprabhu's Leela first. And this is also an idea that has a history, because you start there at Kaitari, about 100 years after Mahaprabhu's appearance. I think it was 100th anniversary of Mahaprabhu's appearance that took place. But I have no really good praman. It's a guess based on numerous clues. Well, so what was established was the Gaura Chandrika. So the Gaura Chandrika has a bit of a history as well. And we see that in Leela Smarana circles that it was probably only really introduced with Vishwanath Chakravarti. There's a Smarana Mangala Stotra, a Chaitanya Smarana Mangala Stotra, Ashtakaliya Smarana Mangala Stotra. It's attributed to him. So we're talking late 17th century here. And then following him, you have Siddha Krishnadas Babaji, which is early 19th century, or at the earliest late 18th century, who is writing the Bhavanasara Sangraha and so on, who also writes an Ashtakaliya Smarana Mangala Stotram for Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So you have those two Smarana Mangala Stotrams, whereas for Radha and Krishna Lila, the Smarana Mangala Stotra that forms the basis of Govinda Lilamrita, that's the only one. Right, so what I'm getting at here is that there is no difference really between the Chaitanya Lila and the Radha Krishna Lila. There really is no, when you get to the innermost portion of Chaitanya Lila, then there's really no difference. There's no outside and inside of Chaitanya Lila and Vrindavan Lila. But they are reflections of one another. And that's what makes it makes the Chaitanya Lila an interesting phenomenon in itself, because one has to look at it in relationship with Radha and Krishna Lila. So you get verses like this, and you see at the end of the Madhya Lila, the verses where Kaviraj Goswami says that they are two different tastes that are mixed together. Amrita Pur and Karpura. So really, he says that Radha and Krishna Lila is Amrita Pur, and that Chaitanya Lila is Sukarpura. So even in Mahaprabhu, in Kaviraj Goswami's explanation, the pastimes of Chaitanya are a flavoring that adds a special flavor to Radha and Krishna Lila. At any rate, by the time that Prabodhananda Saraswati has come around to writing about the Vrindavan Mahimamrita, so I've already explained the likelihood of the historical progression. He's gone through Chaitanya. He's done his Chaitanya Chandrika in the Chaitanya Chandramrita, right? He's stated his position on Mahaprabhu Tattva. He stated his position on who is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And we take that as that grantha, that book, Chaitanya Chandramrita, is a jewel of our sampradaya. Many, many wonderful, wonderful verses in the Chaitanya Chandramrita. Then comes the 17th Shataka of Vrindavana Mahimamrita, the Vrindavana Shataka. And then comes Radha Rasa Sudhanidhi. So these books have an interesting, because they have Mahaprabhu Mangalacharanas, right? So this is what I'll go into in a little bit more detail in the commentary here. But in the Chaitanya Shataka, you have 4 verses, or maybe it's 5, 4 verses at least, that are dedicated to Chaitanya. And they're very nice ones, and we'll actually look at those before we go on. And then there's a couple of verses interspersed in the rest of Vrindavan Mahimamrita. But if we take the Vrindavan Mahimamrita as being composed in 2 phases, right? One is being the 17th, and then the rest is being the more ambitious effort. Sometimes it's said that Prabodhananda Saraswati wanted to have 100 shatakas. So I expect that this was kind of an ongoing project, that even though he might have maybe deviated and gone into writing something else at some time, the Vrindavan Mahimamrita represented a project that he was conducting to the end of his life. So we have and perhaps he intended that the 17th Shatak should be the crowning Shatak. So he puts it it's at the end, and it almost stands like a separate work. But here, and when he starts here at the beginning of the first Shataka, it's a completely new a completely new book that he's beginning to write. So he meditates on Radha and Muralī-Manohara, and I should say a word or two about Muralī-Manohara, because Muralī-Manohara, there's not a very common name. Actually, not so long ago, Satyaraj was writing something, because the deity in the ISKCON's Brooklyn temple is apparently called Muralī-Manohara. And Satyaraj, being the prolific writer that he is, was approached by the New York temple to write something about to commemorate the occasion of the, whatever it was, 50th anniversary or something of the establishment of those deities. So he was looking around and he contacted me to have, was there any temple anywhere that's called Radha Manohara or Radha Krishna, Radha Muralī-Manohara, where the word Murali is specific mention. So the Muralidhar or Murali Mohan, there are a number of different names that have the word Murali in it, but you don't see so many temples. It's hard to find a temple where it's Radha Muralidhar or Radha Muralī-Manohara, as in this verse. So I was quite surprised to find that this was actually quite a favored name, that at least one time that Prabodhananda Saraswati uses, Prabodha Saraswati Pada, uses much more than anywhere else. You don't see that name in the Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya that much elsewhere. So that's always an interesting way of examining a writer's work, Gaudiya Vaishnava writer's work, because you just see what epithets he uses. Which names of Krishna does he like the best? Which ones does he return to again and again? Radha Madhava, Radha Gopinath, Radha Vrindavana Bihari, so many. Radha Muralidhara is not so common. So it's interesting to see that Prabodhananda Saraswati uses it that many times. So he's thinking of Radha and Muralī-Manohara. He's got the picture of the divine couple standing together with Krishna in his threefold bending form and playing the flute, and Radha holding a lotus flower in her hand, and the two of them glancing at each other through the corners of their eyes. Apanga drishti. So he does that. Now, can you do this simultaneously? Well, here it is. He says, I'm offering up my soul into the dust of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's lotus feet. Well, what can I say? That is such a beautiful sentence. You could have translated, I could have translated it, he offers up himself, offering up myself. But we use this atma word to mean both self and soul. So when we see self, sometimes the definition becomes a little rough. I can say, I hurt myself. Well, you're talking about your body, and so on. So we use the word self to describe ourselves on different levels of consciousness or awareness. So here, Prabodhananda Saraswati wants to go to the very essence of himself, to his divine essence as a spiritual being. And where does that spiritual being belong? Mama janmani janmanishvare bhavatad bhaktir ahoituki tvayi. The beginning of every spiritual task is to examine the entire spiritual quest from beginning to end. When Prabodhananda Saraswati, he's not going to talk that much about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He's not going to describe Chaitanya Lila. For him, Chaitanya Lila is the doorway to Radha and Krishna Lila. But it's not different. It's not separate. Surrendering to Krishna, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, to merge oneself into the dust of his lotus feet, that is the same thing as thinking of Radha and Krishna. It's the same thing as dwelling on Radha and Krishna. It's the same thing as meditating, making the principal object of your meditation Radha and Krishna. The two things aren't separate. So Gaur Lila, Vrindavan Lila, those two things are equal in transcendence. But Mahaprabhu Lila represents the Sadhaka Lila, and Vrindavan Lila represents the Sadhya Lila. So the sadhana and sadhya, the method and the final goal. But in this particular case, once again, achintya bheda bhed, there's no difference between the external and the internal here. The mood, the spirit, the quality of consciousness is fundamentally the same. Just as reading in Bhaktivinoda Thakur talks about Madhurya and Audarya. He says that Radha and Krishna are the same tattva, Radha and Krishna and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as the combined form of Radha and Krishna are the same tattva, but it's simply that same tattva is colored predominantly by Madhurya in the Radha and Krishna in Vrindavan, and it's primarily touched by Audarya in the Chaitanya Lila. But this does not mean that there's no Audarya in Radha and Krishna and no Madhurya in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So the two things, we have to be able to hold them simultaneously. We throw ourselves at the feet and we merge ourselves into the dust of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's lotus feet. The dust of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's lotus feet, which is also Vrindavan. And there we meditate on Radha and Krishna. So then śrī-vṛndāvana-divya-vaibhavam guṇa-nidhīn atyādarād ānaman. So after Radha and Krishna, or Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who is combined form of Radha and Krishna, and surrendering to them, hello.